Chapter 19. The Worst Mistake. She was flying, skimming the ground with no track under her. Not even a hoverboard, keeping herself aloft by sheer willpower in the wind in her outspread jacket. She skirted the edge of a massive cliff that overlooked a huge black ocean. A flock of seabirds pursued her, their wild screams beating at her ears like Dr. Cable's razor-edged voice. Suddenly, the stony cliffs beneath her cracked and fissured. A huge rift opened up, the ocean rushing in with a roar that drowned the seabirds' cries. She found herself tumbling through the air, falling down towards the black water. The ocean swallowed her, filling her lungs, freezing her heart so that she couldn't cry out. "No!" Tally shouted, sitting bolt upright. A cold wind off the sea struck her face, clearing her head. Tally looked around, realizing that she was up on the cliffs, tangled up in her sleeping bag, tired, hungry, and desperate to pee, but not falling into oblivion. She took a deep breath. The seabirds still cried around her, but in the distance. That last dream had been only one of many falling nightmares. Night was coming, the sun setting over the ocean, turning the water blood red. Tally pulled her skirt and jacket on before daring to emerge from the sleeping bag. The temperature seemed to be dropping by the minute, the light fading before her eyes. She hurried to get ready to go. The hoverboard was the tricky part. Tally tried to wipe it off with her jacket sleeve, but there was too much water and not enough jacket. The wet board folded up easily enough, but it felt too heavy when she was done, as if the water was still trapped between the layers. The board's operation light turned yellow, and Tally looked closely. The sides of the board were gradually oozing the water away. Fine. Gives me time to eat. Tally pulled out a packet of Spag Bowl, then realized that her purifier was empty. The only ready source of water was at the bottom of the cliff, and there was no way down. She wrung out her wet jacket, which produced a few good swishes, then scraped off the handfuls of water oozing from the board until the purifier was half full. The result was a dense, overspiced Spag Bowl that required lots of chewing. By the time she was done with the unhappy meal, the board's light had turned green. "Okay, ready to go," Tally said to herself. But where? She stood still, pondering, one foot on the board and one at the ground. Shay's note read, "At this second, make the worst mistake." Making a mistake shouldn't be hard. But what's the worst mistake? She'd almost killed herself once today already. Tally remembered her dream. Falling into the gorge would count as a pretty bad mistake. She stepped onto the board and edged it to the crumbling end of the bridge, looking down to where the river met the sea far below. If she climbed down, her only possible path would be to follow the river upstream. Maybe that's what the clue meant. But the steep cliff showed no obvious path, not even a handhold. Of course, a vein of iron in the cliff might carry her down safely. Her eyes scanned the walls of the gorge, searching for the reddish color of iron. A few spots looked promising, but in the growing darkness she couldn't be certain. Great. Tally realized that she'd slept too long. Waiting for dawn would be 12 hours lost, and she didn't have any more water. The only other option was to hike upriver atop the cliff. But it might be days before she reached a place to climb down, and how would she see at night? She had to make up time, not blunder around in the dark. Tally swallowed, coming to a decision. There had to be a way down on her board. Maybe she was making a mistake, but that's what the clue called for. She edged the board off the bridge until it began to lose purchase. It slipped down the cliffside, descending faster as it left the metal of the track behind. Tally's eyes searched desperately for any sign of iron in the cliff. She eased the board forward, bringing it closer to the wall of stone, but saw nothing. A few of the board's metal detector lights flickered out. Any lower, and she was going to fall. This wasn't going to work. Tally snapped her fingers. The board slowed for a second, trying to climb, but then shivered and continued to descend. Too late. Tally spread her jacket, but the air in the gorge was still. She spatted a rusty-looking streak in the wall of stone and coaxed the board closer, but it turned out just to be a slimy smear of lichen. The board slipped downward faster and faster, the metal detector lights flickering out one by one. Finally, the board was dead. Tally realized that this mistake had been her last. She fell like a rock, down toward the crashing waves, just like in the dream. Her voice felt choked by the freezing hand, as if her lungs were filled with water. The board tumbled below her, spinning like a falling leaf. Tally closed her eyes, waiting for the shattering impact of cold water. Suddenly, something grabbed her by her wrists and yanked her up cruelly, spinning her in the air. Her shoulders screamed with pain, and she spun one side of the way around, like a gymnast on the rings. Tally opened her eyes and blinked. She was being lowered onto the hoverboard, which waited rock steady just above the water. What the? She wondered aloud. Then, as her feet came to rest, Tally realized what had happened. The river had caught her. It had been dumping metal deposits there for centuries, or however long rivers lasted. The board's magnets had found purchase just in time. Saved, more or less, Tally muttered. She rubbed her shoulders, which ached from being caught by the crash bracelets, and wondered how far you'd have to fall before the bracelets would rip your arms out of your sockets. But she'd made it down. The river stretched out in front of her, winding its way into the snow-capped mountains. Tally shivered in the ocean breeze and put her soggy jacket tighter around her. 4 days later, took the side you despise. She quoted Shay's note. 4 days. Might as well get started. After her first sunburn, Tally stuck a sunblock patch onto her skin every morning at dawn. But even with only a few hours in the sun each day, her already brown arms gradually deepened in color. Spag Bowl never again tasted as good as it had the first time on the cliffs. Tally's meals ranged from decent to odious. The worst were Spag Bowl breakfasts. Around sunset, the mere thought of more noodles made her never want to eat again. She almost wished she would run out of the stuff and be forced to either catch a fish and cook it, or simply starve, losing her ugly fat the hard way. What Tally really dreaded was running out of toilet paper. Her only roll was already half gone, and she'd rationed it strictly now, counting the sheets, and every day she smelled a little worse. On the third day up the river, she decided to take a bath. Tally woke an hour before sunset as usual, feeling sticky inside the sleeping bag. She'd washed her clothes that morning and left them to dry on a rock. The thought of getting into clean clothes with dirty skin made her flesh crawl. The water in the river was fast-moving, and left almost nothing in the muck trap of the purifier, which meant it was clean. It was icy cold, though, probably fed by melting snow in the approaching mountains. Tally prayed it would be slightly less freezing in the day, after the sun had had a chance to warm it up. The survival kit did have soap, it turned out, a few disposable packets tucked into a corner of the knapsack. Tally clenched one in her hands as she stood at the edge of the river, wearing nothing but the sensor clip to her belly ring, shivering in the cold breeze. "Here we go," she said, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. She put one foot in and jumped back from the icy streak of agony that shot into her leg. Apparently, there would be no easing slowly into the water. She had to take a running jump. Tally walked along the riverbank, searching for a good place to leap in, slowly gathering her courage. She realized she'd never been naked outside before. In the city, everywhere outdoors was public, but she hadn't seen another human face for days. The world seemed to belong to her. Even in the cool air, the sun felt wonderful on her skin. She clenched her teeth and faced the river. Standing here pondering the while wasn't going to get her clean. Just a few steps and a leap, and gravity would do the rest. She counted down from 5, then counted down from 10, neither of which worked. Then she realized she was getting colder just standing there. Finally, Tally jumped. The freezing water closed like a fist around her. It paralyzed every muscle, turning her hands into shivering claws. For a moment, Tally wondered how she would make it back to the shore. Maybe she would just expire here, slipping under the icy water forever. She took a deep, shuddering breath, reminding herself that the people before the Rusties must have taken baths in freezing streams all the time. Tally clenched her teeth to stop them from chattering, and dipped her head under the water and out, wiping her hair onto her back. A few moments later, an unlikely kernel of warmth ignited her stomach, as if the icy water had activated some secret reserve of energy within her body. Her eyes opened wide, and she found herself whooping with excitement. The mountains, towering over her after 3 nights' travel inland, seemed suddenly crystal clear, their snowy peaks catching the last rays of the setting sun. Tally's heart pounded fiercely, her blood spreading unexpected warmth throughout her body, but the burst of energy was burning quickly. She fumbled the soap packet, squishing it between her fingers, across her skin, and into her hair. Another dunking, she was ready to get out. Looking back at the shore, Tally realized that she had been carried away from her camp by the river's current. She swam a few strokes upstream, then trudged towards the rocky shore, waist-high in water, already shivering from the breeze in her wet body. Tally heard something that made her heart freeze. Something was coming. Something big.